Hello, and welcome to this segment around diversifying corporate boards. I'm honored to be invited to help moderate this panel with a very august group. India, thank you for the invitation and for organizing this amazing summit. Thank you to you. And for inviting Mohammed and Michael to join us our morning in the US to talk about how we're going to get the complexion of business change to make more representation happen in boards around the world. Mohammed has an illustrious career in public accounting, also being a board member. Michael created something called the Power List, which is a list everyone wants to get on of important, prominent, rising stars. In India, you have done amazing things as an American working in Europe, being a non-executive board member. We cannot wait to talk with you. So thank you all very much. India, do you want to say a few words before we start? For an introduction?
Sure. I'll keep it really, really brief. I'm just really excited to be a panelist. That's what I'll say. I'm excited to be. I'm excited to. This group this is just a treat, and I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to sit in this room with these people having this conversation.
Our virtual room. Thank you so much. Thank you. My name is friend Mohammed, calling in from Kenya.
I'm actually in Washington. I left Kenya about 3 days ago, but I'm in DC today.
Is there jet lag? Any jet lag?
A little bit of jet lag, but with 4 kids, you get over it very quickly.
Well done, well done. So tell us about you.
So I'm the acting chair of Britain in Kenya, and it's a multinational organization, financial services based out of 7 countries in East and Central Africa. So if you're taking a look at the diversification of boards and you're looking at a black man in Africa being on the chair, from the outside, it seems that straightforward. But I think when you dig a little bit deeper, you realize our organization, Britain, is incredibly diverse. We have board members from the United States, from the UK, from Switzerland. So you've got race diversity, you've got gender diversity. A third of our members are women. And I think Britain is just a microcosm of the Nairobi Securities Exchange. And this wasn't the case 5 years ago. If you take a look at the organization that I was in, it looked exactly the same at the board level. And that has fundamentally changed, all the way to our new executive, who is a Zimbabwean national based in Nairobi. So this is something that not only Britain has embraced and has actively worked on over the past 5 years, but the Nairobi Securities Exchange has actively done this and doubled its statistics. I know other stock exchanges are going in the opposite direction despite what's happening. Nairobi Securities Exchange, which I'm very proud of, and this is one of the most prominent exchanges in Africa, has gone the other way, against the grain, to actually make this sustainable in terms of diversity.
When we come back to you, we want to hear about your journey from public accounting, Pricewaterhouse, to this amazing mission you're on the continent. We'll come back to you. And I'd like to welcome Michael, who's in the UK, I believe, without jet lag.
I'm absolutely in the UK, and I don't have any jet lag at all because I've not actually traveled for so long now. I've even forgotten what jet lag actually feels like. Right?
Welcome to you. Tell us how you ended up on India's shortlist for this panel. I know that you're a journalist and you've turned this Power List into something of a machine, not just a list, not just placements, but an event.
Yeah, I started out as a lawyer who became a journalist, who's now, I guess, pretty much an entrepreneur. I run a company called Powerful Media. We essentially promote Black people in the UK and into a positive light. We're rebranding Black Britain, as we put it. And it needed rebranding. We started this journey 15 years ago now. And at the time, there was the rhetoric was that there are no Black role models. So I'm like, look, I know hundreds of Black role models in my own personal life. Okay, so we did a publication and we showed 100 of the most influential Black people in the UK, and we do that every year. The list changes by about 30% per annum, which shows that there are more and more people coming through, and it really is a list of the great and the good. So all of these organisations, and I'm sure we'll come to this later on, that sort of claim that there are there are no qualified people for board positions and stuff like this. I can pick up any one of my 15 publications. This is an annual publication, so we've got 15 now. I can pick up any one of them and say, look, here are 100 people, the vast majority of whom are ready to serve on a decent board for a decent company. And that's one of the things that we do. We have a recruitment business as well.
Tips. Like, we want tips, Michael. How do we get on your list? How does one get on the list? What's the tip?
No, that's a different thing. You see, now I'm not the right person to ask for that because I don't choose who gets on the list. We have an independent panel. It's led by, and again, this gives you a sense of where the UK is in terms of diversity. It's actually led by the only High Court judge, black High Court judge that we've ever had. Her name is Dame Linda Dobbs. And there are 6 other really sort of quite reputable people who sit on it. I don't sit on there. They pick people who, quite often I disagree with, but we set that out from day one, just so that, people saw that it was done in the right way. But as I said, that's just one of the things that we do. We do a lot of stuff with black students, and we get them into good corporate organizations. We have a recruitment business, which focuses on the recruitment of executives in financial, legal, and professional services. And we also have the biggest and most prestigious corporate social event. It's called the Black Excellence Awards, and it's celebrated every October, which, for those of you who don't know, October is in the UK, our Black History Month. Corresponding with Black History Month in February in the US. So we're
really
quite busy.
We're pleased that you picked a long month. I'm glad you have a 31-day month of celebration. In the US, it's only 28 days, and I think that's far more fitting. So that's excellent. So we've all been thinking about boards. We've all been thinking about representation. In fact, I started a firm called the Monarchs Collective with my partner Deborah Lee from BET, just after the murder of George Floyd in America. And we said exactly that same thing that you said, Michael, which is, you're telling us you can't find qualified people. We know people, they're out there. So let's make it easier for those who are choosing to find those folks. When we started this work and this conversation, it became clear that the people in the Black community didn't even know that this is a huge wealth opportunity, a wealth creation opportunity to be seen and identified and placed on a board. How are we getting the word out to viable candidates to help them raise their hand, to help them be more visible? Are we doing enough with regard to helping that friction decline?
So in the UK, look, in the UK, anybody who's worth their salt as a black, senior black exec, or somebody who's got the relevant sort of experience, everybody is aware that there are opportunities, on boards. Everybody knows that. It's not a problem for black people to understand that. It's a problem for the people who run these organizations to understand that the talent is out there. And largely, boards are populated by very few executive search firms. Recruitment is not brain science. It's not brain. You don't have to be fantastically intelligent to recruit people for an organization. What you do have to have, though, are good contacts with relevant people. So I was on the website of one of the biggest recruitment companies, executive search firms, the other day, and they've got all the usual platitudes that these sort of organizations have around diversity. In fact, I think they said diversity is at the heart of our organization. And conveniently, they had a pull-down section for people, and they showed the top people in their organization. And I went through 110 of the top people in their organization, and not a single one was black. Not a single one was black. And therein lies a large part of the problem. They just, we know people, and more often than not, people know people like them. They know people from their neighborhoods, from their communities, and what have you. These guys didn't have any black people, so how on earth were they? And we know in the UK, there's been research that shows that 95% of white people don't know any black people. That's genuine research. So how on earth are these 100 people supposed to bring black talent to the organizations that are asking for it? It's impossible. It's impossible. The solution is actually to use people who do know that, and there are a number of black-led agencies out there, and it's just a matter of the organizations, the companies that are on the lookout for talent to realize that and to start to use those sort of organizations. Yeah.
Now, Mohammed told us in our pre-meeting that he was working assiduously at a firm. He was running up the ranks. He was bringing in business. He was a rock star, if you will. And when it came time to want to be on a board, I think he was sort of discouraged from it, told it's not how we do it. It can't be done. Mohammed, tell us your story and how did you crack through that resistance?
It's interesting. Thank you very much, Rabia. I had to crack through the resistance actually leaving the United States and working in Africa because I noticed it was a complete glass ceiling. In the United States, I worked for an IT company where I led up the healthcare IT practice, very large practice throughout the United States. And I ended up being the advisory leader, consulting leader for Unisys for the United States. Yet I'm serving these clients at the highest level. There was no opportunity. So I come to Africa. I lead up advisory for PwC in East and Central Africa. And the time my family decides it's ready for them to come back to Washington, D.C., the largest bank, one of the largest banks, and the largest insurance group immediately reached out and asked if I would join their board. They were clients of mine. And I just thought how interesting that is. Similar clients in the United States for many, many years, not even a discussion. But in East and Central Africa, the minute you leave, how can you add value on our boards immediately? And that's how I ended up at Britam, a night and day discussion. And I'd say, Rabia, when I was invited 4 or 5 years ago, the boards weren't dissimilar from how they are in the United States, maybe, and the UK. But the difference is the Securities Exchange and the companies were looking to make a fundamental leap in growth in the business opportunity. And if you take a look at where the Nairobi Securities Exchange is or was 5 years ago and where it is today, night and day different. When you take a look at where Britam was, by any metric, and where it is today, night and day different. And I would say diversity has had a huge impact to that growth. I think it's very easy for companies in the United States and abroad to say, we value diversity. The question is, what are you willing to do about it? And I think the discomfort of doing something about it is what drives a lot of great companies from not going there. And that's exactly where Britain and a lot of the other companies that work in that part of the world have done. And the results are right there in the bottom line.
We talked in our planning discussion around the fact that those who have the power to make the changes are those who least likely to want to do it because they would be ceding or giving up a lot of that control and that representation. India, you, I think, cracked through by doing something in Europe. And so tell us, as a woman, was it different for you to crack through? Was it harder? What was your experience? And how did you land that first seat?
I think, it was really interesting because I will say, perhaps as a woman, but I think they're very similar themes for me. I mean, I spent 25, almost 20 years of my 30-year, I was going to say 25-year career, but it's actually 30 of my.
We'll round down. You started young.
We'll round down. So I think 20 years outside of the U.S. and that was not just Europe. I was in London, I was in Frankfurt, I was in Hong Kong, I was in Tokyo. So I lived around the world. So my experience is much broader and richer than most people who sit on just national domestic boards of any organization. And that was the thing. And because a lot of my time was in the UK, what ended up happening is that's where a lot of my network is, right? But it's really interesting because in the UK, it was very similar to Mohammed. The minute I came out of my corporate role, the conversation started. It was interesting because at that time it was about women on boards, right? So, my being a Black woman would have probably been a bonus, but I didn't do it at that time. There were other things I was working on, and about, I guess, earlier this year, on the back of everything. I mean, it's a really interesting thing, and I grapple with this because one of the challenges, right, when you do look at some of the senior folks in the UK that are Black that are in these spaces, they're Americans, right? As if only Americans could possibly do this, and I think that's a real kind of biting point for me, and something that has always been terribly frustrating. Is that even in the UK, right? I could name, just like Michael said, I mean, I've been on this powerless journey with Michael watching this for a long time. And there are lots of people who are British born who would be just fine for any of the boards, who could do it probably better than me to some extent. But you do see that, when you think about some of the folks who are lauded in the UK who are Black, they are Black expatriates from America, right? But interestingly enough, back in America, those people wouldn't get a look in no matter what happened. And so it was a really
That's what I
interesting
was
thing.
going to ask you.
That's it, right? Because I come to the US and people aren't even thinking about me when I have, like I said, I had responsibility for a $3 billion organization and 15,000 people in my last job, right? Across 40 countries. I lived in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Frankfurt, and London. I have better experience than a whole bunch of folks who are sitting on any one of the domestic boards in the US, but literally no interest, because they don't know me for that, and because I spent my time outside of the US, right? And it's also true, just being completely frank, of the Black community in the US. When I came back, people didn't want to know, because they're like, we don't know you. Who are you? What is this? Which was a really interesting thing for me to experience. And I'm not saying that, from a social perspective, but from a professional perspective, my experience was not valued by people if they didn't know your name. Right. So they didn't care what you've done. So I think it's just a really important thing that, in addition to talking about how we crack the glass ceiling, that we think about the fact that there is a lot of talent all over the place, and we're not looking broadly or deeply enough, and we're discounting people because of what we think we know instead of actually doing the research.
Yeah.
That's really well said.
No,
Michael?
100%. I can agree with that, India, especially your point about African Americans in the UK sometimes being looked at differently from indigenous Black people in the UK, from Black Brits. It's something that a lot of people within the community do talk about. We've got some, I mean, look, and I can give you some specific examples of this as well. So Rick Lewis, who was on yesterday, Rick has built a company, and I think, if I'm not wrong, he's got something in the order of 15 billion under management. Until this year, I believe, Rick had never been approached to sit on any kind of meaningful board, which is just incredibly ridiculous. It's incredibly ridiculous. He did a fantastic fireside chat at JP Morgan a couple of years ago, where he articulated that point precisely. Rick was number one on our list a couple of years ago. There's another woman, Karen Blackett, who was running £1 billion company. Again, never been approached to sit on a board of any other organization. This is a top Black businesswoman. Since then, I believe she has been approached to sort of sit on a few boards. But the point I'm making is that, generally speaking, we're anonymous. And I remember having a conversation with a recruiter once, who said, so what they do, they come to us because obviously we know our databases are such that they think that they can they can pick some people up from us without paying. I should mention that doesn't really happen. But they came to us and said, "Oh, look, do you have any people? We're looking for someone to sit on the board. I think it was of an insurance company actually." And I mentioned somebody who actually chaired one of the biggest insurance organizations, and it was a black woman. And because they didn't know her, and they couldn't be bothered to go and look her up or research her any way, shape, or form, they automatically came out with something along the lines of, "Well, we're not sure that she would fit." And that's the sort of that's the general sort of cop out language that is used in these organizations. Unlike the police, where you fit the description, in corporate Britain you actually don't fit the description.
Yes. Whenever I hear fit, that's a big red flag. It's a big red flag. So
yeah,
Mohammed,
there are some really.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe, Michael,
okay.
Robbie,
You
if I
used
could
the
just
word
run with what
anonymous.
Michael.
Please.
I just wanted to run with what Michael was saying. It's interesting because one of the comments that I've received, I've had a couple of discussions around American companies that are looking to further expand in Africa over the past couple of years. And the discussion that I'm having with is somebody that has never set foot on the African continent, but has done quite a bit of desktop research. And having spent a decade working out of 22 countries, it's amazing how whatever I was trying to deliver, it was an hour discussion on both occasions. I probably ended up speaking 15 minutes in an hour discussion, where somebody that doesn't understand the continent, who's going to be leading up this multinational American organization in Africa, and that's the representation on the board. So it was just, how can I get 15 minutes out of you? Got it. Let me go ahead and move forward. And I think around diversity, it's always looking at the lens of what you can't do. So we'll put up the best diverse minority candidates and we'll say, this is what they can't do. And this is why we have to rule them out, which is unfortunate, as opposed to the unique lens and perspective that they bring to this opportunity. And I see that's why it's just night and day. It's, you're talking to somebody that has lived it, that understands it, that has been successful in it, but I'm just going to filter down what they're saying, and I'm the one that's going to represent this organization in Africa. I just find that very bizarre in terms of the selection process. It's all around nominations when it comes to boards. And so who's sitting around the nominations table? And as Michael said, are they just looking at themselves and picking from one of their own? Or are they actually looking at somebody that can do the job?
He used the word anonymous. He said we're often anonymous. How do you become less anonymous? How do you become well known? And it seems, Mohammed, you did it based on skill. India did it based on skill, expertise, being a global financial executive. What advice do you have for the audience in terms of becoming less anonymous and more visible in your spaces? India?
Wow. I think it is, Michael kind of alluded to it before. It really is about your relationships, right? It really, I mean, ultimately when you're at that level, it's down to your relationships, because, the way that I got on the first board I'm on, and the second one I'm not announcing yet, but that's coming like in a few days. But the first board,
that's a nail biter. You can't tell us? Hint? All right.
You'll have to go and
Watch
follow me
this
on
space.
LinkedIn and watch the space. Follow me on LinkedIn and watch the space. But the first one
Okay.
was absolutely relationship driven, right? It was about a relationship that I had, well, longer term. So the board that I sit on is Euromoney in the UK, but 40% of the business is in the US, which is one of the reasons they were interested in me, interestingly, for the US business, which is funny because I couldn't do that in the US company, but that's another story. And one of the things that happened is that Andrew Rashbass, who's the CEO of Euromoney, I'd met when he was at The Economist. He was running industry roundtables. He used to run industry roundtables. I'd come to a roundtable. We'd gotten to know each other somewhat. We weren't friends, but I came to The Economist events, came to the roundtables, got to know him. And then over time, he then went to become the CEO of Reuters, and now CEO of Euromoney. And when they were looking at the board and thinking about what was next, he thought of me. Right. I mean, he and a couple of other folks who knew me in that ether thought of me. And so that was a relationship thing. The board that I'm going to announce shortly was very similar. There was a person on the board who had become who moved on to becoming the CEO of the organization and said, "Hey, I think I know somebody who will be great for this." And so those networks and your connectivity is really important. Building relationships is hugely important. If there's one thing that I've always done and always maintained, it's my relationships. Like, I always kind of reach out to people from time to time. I never let a contact go cold, because you can't afford to. If you're interested in doing this, you can't afford to allow your contacts to go cold. You have to be building those relationships. You have to be thinking. But here's the thing about building relationships. I always take the approach when I'm building relationships: what can I offer this person? What can I do for them? Not what can they do for me? Because if that's the approach you take, it's very difficult. And so my approach is always like, how can I engage this person? How can I bring them into the network that I have? Because broadening my network is the purpose. So how do I share? But I mean, both of the people here, I mean, all of you, I met through networks, right? Through our networks, through our respective networks. And so that is a key and critical thing. Because here's the thing, like 15 years ago, when the Powerless started, I wasn't sitting on a board, right? But I knew Michael then, and he knew me then, right? And so now, as we kind of have as I've grown through my career and as I've kind of developed, these relationships that I still have, right, that I can call on, but they're deep because, like, I've known Michael for a long time, right? And even with Mohammed, he and I met through another co-friend of ours, another Kenyan, who I worked with, who was on my first town hall summit. And she was like, "You have got to meet Mohammed." Right. And so these relationships are really, really, really important and key. And so I think that's a big part of building this. A big part of getting there is building your networks as best you can, and remembering that you are not,
it's interesting,
your network is not what you can get from it.
I think that's such a good point. We often talk about the old boys network. It's the network of, the patrician white folks who, went to all the best boarding schools, the best Ivy League colleges, law schools, business schools. And we're trying to bust that up because they're contacting each other. It's a nice circle for them, but it's a very closed circle. What you're describing is the need for us to create networks that are really based on capabilities, whether it's a skill set, geographic experience, a way of thinking. But when I think of your network, it's not just because people may look like you, it's because they have complementary skills and interests to you. How do you decide you want to invest in someone? Because you are very good at investing. And how do you decide you want to invest in someone? You didn't know the Euro Money guy would be the guy. How did you know to nurture that relationship?
You know what? To be honest, I invest in relationships based on people I like, frankly. No, I'm
You
being
like
honest.
them. Okay.
No, if I do, it's important, right? I mean, there are some things that you do. There are people that I would say are more acquaintances that, you meet and you develop your contacts, and that's fine. But I develop my network based on people I like, and I think that's a really important thing, because I know that they have similar values to me, right? I wouldn't go sit on the board. I've had a lot of board conversations that I had zero interest in when I met the people. I mean, and I passed some things up and I was like, will this ever come again? But the reality is I didn't like the people. And one thing I'm not going to do at this stage and age of my life is sit in a room with people I don't like. And I'm not going to spend my time and invest in people I don't like. Why would I do that? I mean, because it's really ultimately about fulfillment for oneself, fulfillment for your own ambition. And you have to create the environment that you want. And so who you surround yourself with is really, really important. And so, yes, obviously, Andrew was the CEO of The Economist at the time, and it's one of my favorite publications. So I was really interested in him and why and how he did that, right? That was one thing. And then he was doing these industry roundtables. By the way, this was like 2007 or 2008 with Black executives, right? So I had this connection to him because he was thinking about and asking questions to groups of people who normally weren't even getting a look in. And so those relationship things are based upon that kind of connectivity. He was paying attention to who I was beyond being an executive and was asking questions, right? And then, again, if you think about how you start to shape your relationships and your experiences, you create what you want, ultimately. You have to. Because when you can't step into relationships and be who you are and you're trying to just get a contact because they're a contact, people can see through that. It is so obvious, which is why I only want to serve people or connect people that I like, because I know that that's a part of the equation. It really is the depth of the relationship and how long it'll be enduring and whether or not we can carry it on.
We know that people are the sum of the 5 people, the average of the sum of the 5 people they spend the most time with. So pick your 5 people really carefully because they end up sort of imbuing you with their qualities. One of the challenges I had recently with a client is that he was invited to join the board, his first public board, of a publicly traded company. And when he told me the name, I went, oh, really? And I said, I'd pass, wait for the next one. He says, oh, but I need one. But once I get one, I'll be visible, I can get on more. And then I said, but aren't you obliged to only be on one board because you actually have a full-time executive job? He goes, oh yeah, fair. So Mohammed, I want to ask you, if you're on a board and you're approached by a board, how do you know if it's worth saying yes because you're so flattered they asked you versus being choosy and saying, I like what you're saying, but it's not the right time for me, not the right company for me? How do you make the calculus to take the first one or not?
Excellent question. I guess it will be a three-pronged approach. The first would be what I wouldn't want to do, and to be very clear. So there have been a few roles that have been pitched to me that have been completely clear tokenization. We need a Black person on the board.
Yep.
You are
Yep.
it.
Yep.
That I won't do. And it's challenging to resist, but that I won't do. And how do I establish that it's tokenization? When you go and unpack what you're going to do on the role, you're not in any meaningful committees, right? And really, you're meeting a metric that that company is not meeting. That to me is a dead end position. No, thank you. You can go to the next person. So that's what gets me to not accept it. So, what would get me to accept this sexy role? I've been very fortunate where I'm currently at Britain, where I came in as a director on one or two committees, grew and rose into multiple impactful committees to being the deputy chair and now the acting chair. So I need to be able to look at a path for growth and success where I can bring the skills that I've developed over 25 years to help the organization that I'm with. So start off with what I will not do. That's very, very easy. Then we can focus on what kind of capabilities that I can add to it. And just going back to the anonymous feeling. So I touched on the tokenization and what I'm currently building on, which is the space that I feel that I can contribute the most and that I'm wanted in East and Central Africa. The third aspect, which I'm about to embark on, is okay, in the United States, take a look at companies that look like myself. There's a designation in the United States that says 8A. Typically, it's minority owned, women owned businesses. And how can I contribute in a meaningful way on a board with those companies? And to me, that's the path that I'm now starting to pursue because the big multinationals, at least in the United States, aren't interested in somebody that looks like me with the experiences that I have, even though those experiences are exactly what they need in the African continent.
So India, would you take, if you were advising one of your mentees, of which you have many, would you say to that person, yes, take it, serve for a couple of years, then come off? Or would you say, it doesn't resonate for you, maybe it's tokenization, stand down, wait for the next one, it will come? Which would you advise your mentee?
I think it depends, to be honest. I mean, I want to pick up on a point. I'll answer that, but I want to pick up on a point that Mohammed made about tokenization, which is huge, right? And but I will say this: we do have to start somewhere too, right? And I am all about that. But here's the thing: another, I think, kind of lens to add to the tokenization question and adding to how you identify is asking the question. So, like on one of the boards that I was referring to earlier, the first thing I said was, where do you stand with DE&I? Because I see that there are not many of me on your leadership team, and there are not many of me on your board, any. So what does that mean, and what are you trying to do? And they said, we need help. We don't know how to do this, and that's why and so we are asking because we need help, and we know that you know exactly what we need to do and how to do it. And so here's the thing: if you're going to put me on your board, and pay me to make sure that I'm helping you to diversify your organization, I am all for it, right? But you need to say that. That is an open thing. I need to know that's your objective. And so I'm prepared to help, because I think that in certain organizations who want to do that, it is very true that a lot of these folks, like Michael said, 95% of white people don't know any Black people. How are they going to find those people to put on their boards, to put in leadership roles? You need to have somebody in the boardroom who can help do that too. And so that was one of the choices I made around that, knowing that I'm the only one. I mean, it's not a secret. You can go look at the boards, that I sit on. I'm the only one, and that's okay for now, right? That is not an enduring thing. Like, I'm not going to do that forever. And there is a point at which you have to talk the talk. I mean, you have to walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. So we have to see what those shifts look like over time. But I think I would tell my mentee to be true to yourself, right? At the end of the day, you may really, really want a board. And I wanted one for a long time. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't. Of course I did. But here's the thing. I was approached for a lot of financial services organizations, and I wasn't interested in that, because I've done that already. I had a long career there, and I didn't want to do that specifically. And here's the other thing. I didn't want to be on a board with 25 people, because my voice would likely not get heard. If I was on a board with 25 people and I was the only one of color, and maybe one of the only women, I think there was a bad chance in hell that I'd be heard. Now, again, you have to start somewhere, but I wasn't that person to kick it off. And that's what I would tell my mentee. Pay attention to the boards that you join. Pay attention to the composition, the likelihood of you being able to have impact, and then make a decision.
Yeah,
Fair enough. Now, Michael, I want to come back to you. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna add to what India was saying there. I think one of the issues is this. There's when we talk about tokenism, there are no major boards, no FTSE boards in the UK that have, I think, more than one Black person on them. Now, let's take it right back. Why is it important that these organizations diversify in the first place? The whole thing about that is, and Mohammed mentioned it earlier on, it's been proved beyond reasonable doubt now that diverse organizations are better organizations. They're better places to work. They are generally more profitable. The big problem, however, is that the people that run these organizations, they just don't believe, they genuinely don't believe that that's the case. So what happens is a kind of like, okay, we know we need to for the optics, we know we need to show diversity here, but actually we don't want to put too many of them on there. And there is a theory that I think the average FTSE board is about 10 people, just over 10 people or so, right? There is a theory that unless you have 3 people on that board who are diverse, actually doesn't really matter, because one person isn't ever going to be able to make that much difference. And
100%,
I think that's
100%.
the next thing that we need to start looking at, because it's all well and good, appointing someone and then shouting from the rooftops that, look at us, look how wonderful we are. We've got a Black person on our board. But if that Black person can't really bring any of their lived experience to that board simply because they're the one and only person who's there, then you've got to really ask yourself, what's the point in the first place?
Did we lose Rabia?
I think we've lost Rabia there.
We might.
Yes.
That's okay.
I mean, Mohammed, in Africa, I guess. Sorry to cut you, India.
No,
So
go.
in Africa, of course, I lived in Nigeria. Okay, so I lived there for 8 years, and I did my first degree there. And so, in Africa, of course, we don't have that issue. There isn't that issue, apart from, as you said, on some of the multinational organizations. How do you, what's your experience of that side of things in terms of bringing on more diverse people?
I think I would actually change that a little bit, Michael. I think in Africa 5 years ago, we had the issue because it's just the
Oh,
opposite version, right? Where you have everybody that looks the same on all of these big boards. And 5 years ago, as I said, I'm just picking on one securities exchange, Nairobi, made a conscious effort to not make it tokenization. The stock exchange needed to grow, which meant the companies that represented the stock exchange needed to grow. And so you started seeing this multinational expansion. Britain was no exception. We go from one, two, three companies to seven companies, and we're looking to further expand across the continent in the coming years. So our boards represented our ambition. They represented our shareholding effectively, they represent our customers effectively. And that's why when you take a look at diversification, it's not just race, it's not just gender or nationality or faith, it's all encompassing. And I
mm,
think in Africa, what happens is, and it's very interesting why it does not happen in the West, is when you've worked at a place as a consultant, whatever capacity it is, the minute you've left that executive role, almost all of the large companies, because they're driven by expansion, by bottom line, they're looking for simply the best talent. And so my career aspirations are always going to be tied to the continent because that's where I have the best opportunity. Quite frankly, it's
mm.
the only area where I have the opportunity outside of an executive. At a board level, unless I look at 8A companies, minority companies in the United States, it just won't happen for me. Not for a long time, maybe a decade or 2 decades from now. But in Africa, the biggest companies will come knocking on your door if you've achieved what India has achieved, Michael, what you've achieved. It's night and day.
We've had a
That's really
question
interesting.
from
So,
the, go ahead.
so I was going to make a point there. So just the other day, that's really interesting. We had a power list event. So we host sort of networking events, and we were asked by the new Nigerian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom to come and meet him. And the reason he wanted us to come and meet him was that he was very interested in bringing diaspora expertise back to the African continent. So we had about 30 people at the official residence, and a really, really, really interesting conversation about people going back to work with African-centered companies and bring the expertise that they have from here to there, and that actually going forward in future may be another avenue for Black people who are interested in working on interesting boards.
No doubt. I think that is so. I have to hop in there for a quick second because I do a lot of work on the continent as well, mostly in South Africa. And the relationships that I have there are so different. I mean, like the value that they see immediately is so different. And so I think that is an avenue. And I'm all about, we had the brain drain coming off the continent. Let's take it back, right? Let's take it back to
Mm,
where we're valued, where we're wanted, where people appreciate all of the richness of experience that we bring. And that's our heritage. So I think that there's something to that for sure. I'm sorry, Rabia. I know you're back. We're glad to see you. So I'm going to hand back over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm in New York. You would think it was easy to be connected. We have about 15 minutes left, and we wanted to ask some questions. Some have come through already, and we'll invite more questions through our moderator. One of the questions that came in early is, what kind of training do companies offer to new board members? And I'd like to know your experience, and I've got a point of view there as well. Have you had experience seeing companies deliberately train incoming board members?
I can take that. I
I'll
can
go.
start with experience. Oh, go ahead, Mohammed. You go first.
Go. All right. We actually
Oh,
do
you're so
at
polite.
Britain,
Go ahead,
and I
Mohammed.
think thank you very much. We actually have a complete induction program for all of our directors, whether you're experienced or not, and we take actually even more time for our non-experienced directors. So we have a multi-day program. On top of that, and this is just part of the stock exchange, on an annual basis, we go through a 3-day training program for directors where we engage them with, the topical issues across the board. So we take a look at it from a lens of, do you have experience as a director? If the answer is no, we customize that training for you. If the answer is yes, we bring you towards our industry, because not all of our directors have financial services experience. And then on an annual basis, we go through at least a 3-day program of training for all of our directors across the group. So that's kind of how we got there. The other way, which has also been unique for me living in Africa and working on the African continent, is the work that I did almost always resulted in me presenting to a board on a weekly basis. That also gives you experience in terms of engagement. So we have a lot of minority executives that don't have the experience. They might be presenting to their own boards, but they don't have experience in presenting to other boards. And so part of the training curriculum we also have is, how do you engage with other boards? How do we sit you in, even as an observer of our associate companies, where you can see and experience how the dynamics work over time.
Thank you. Michael, are you seeing anything different where you sit?
No, I think there's a number of Black-led organizations that provide training for potential board appointees. And the one that immediately sort of springs to mind is the ELC, the Executive Leadership Council, who I know have been doing that for quite a long time. I know they're quite well established in the US, and they have a branch established in the UK now as well. We have a number of other initiatives around preparing Black people, particularly for board positions. So, I'd like to put it out there once again that the idea that we're not ready, because that's another thing. Oh, they're not ready. No, actually, they really are. They really are ready. They're ready and they're competent. And I love what Mohammed just sort of said, that even people without experience can be made ready relatively quickly and relatively efficiently if the organization deems that something that is important to them.
I'm going to be controversial here and say that we could take someone who is highly qualified and well trained and pop them into a boardroom meeting, and we might find they actually don't have their voice, or the conversations actually aren't authentically driven towards the financial duties that the board members have. I've seen so many board conversations that are very superficial. We're all here, everyone endorsed the notes. Oh, we're good, let's move on. And then you've got the new person who comes in and says, I've been trained, I'm ready. I'm going to ask some penetrating questions about the financial statements or the strat plan. And they're like, oh, no, we don't do that here. That's not what we do. So I think it's a really interesting question. What do companies offer to onboard their board members, regardless of how they identify? Because I think it tells you a lot about what they expect, the rigor they expect that member to bring. Otherwise, I think it feels like we've just populated our seats. When Mohammed described his program, it sounds to me like we take this seriously. Your time is valuable. You're here. You've got a duty to us. We're going to give you a set of expectations, and we're going to prepare you for that. I would ask prospective boards, what is your onboarding process? And if they say you'll spend 20 minutes with each of us chiefs, I would say, is that all you do? And that would get a little bit more information. What do you think, India?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when you're evaluating, this is so topical, when you're evaluating the board, you're also evaluating the culture. Right. So it's not just about the role, it's about the culture of the board and of the organization. That's one thing. I would say that I've experienced the same thing around induction that Mohammed talked about. But I will tell you that going from being an executive to going to being a board member is very different. It's a different function, different role, and the behaviors are very different. The expectations are very different. I mean, my board packs are 300 pages, that I have to kind of make sure that I'm familiar with. But it also requires an ability to be able to pick out the big issues, which you can't do without an induction, right? So, if you get 300 pages of board papers, which you might, before you step into a board meeting, how do I know as a new person, this is a novel, right? So how do I know the kind of key and important points that I have to read through? And that induction process helps you to identify. But here's the other thing about induction and training. It's also about you asking questions intuitively based on your experience. So you have to ask the questions to be able to get the right answers. Because again, if you have a big deck, a big 300-page thing, and you aren't prepared to ask questions, then you're, again, not going to necessarily get the answers to the kinds of things you're going to need to be prepared for when you step in. I will also say, as kind of a closing point on that, is that, most boards, when you join them, they don't have an expectation that day one you're like out of the gates. I mean, they obviously want you to contribute, but that's not their expectation. I have not experienced one yet where they're like, okay, day one, you need to do X. It really is about finding your feet, but doing it in a meaningful way. And so asking questions, making sure that you're observing how the board behaves in terms of culture will give you the cues. And so it's about kind of watching, paying attention, observing, and reading the papers, because that's pretty key. That gives you the perspective around the kinds of things that the organization finds important. And listen to who gets the most airtime. I'm talking about when folks come into the room to present to the board, who's getting the airtime, because that will give you some perspective around who the folks are that are driving the business or that are driving decision making.
Let's talk about committees. A lot of work happens in committees. And earlier we talked about getting on the right committees. We know nominating is important, governance is important. I'd like your perspective, Michael, when you're advising folks. What committees do you suggest people go for? And then how do you describe the work that happens in committee?
Oh boy. It really depends upon the person's own sort of particular skill level. I know a lot of and this is, again, here we go again. A lot of Black people will say that they don't get the important committees. It takes quite a while before you do. So it's very, very, very difficult to sort of say how to advise someone around that, because it's so subjective that it's almost impossible. I do know a particular person who's made a career, however, and this is something worth noting. She's made a career out of chairing audit committees. So she was, she was a very well-known person in the sort of accounting world, and she's made a career out of sitting on boards and simply chairing audit committees, and she's in demand as a result of that. That is her sort of level of expertise, and there's no reason why anyone else can't pick a particular area and focus on that, and use that as their leverage to sort of move from one board onto another, and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Mohammed, will you demystify for us, when you think about a committee meeting, what is different about a committee meeting versus being in a boardroom meeting?
I think the way we run committees, or at least I've seen in quite a few boards, is the committees is where all the hard work happens. So you synthesize everything in the decision making to the board. And I think that's where you're able to engage in a lot more detail with management. You're able to engage in a lot more detail with even your customer base. So, to me, the committee work, if done correctly, is where the most important work is done, because that's where, at the end of it, you're able to synthesize decision making for the full board. Is it clear in what happened? Our committees can take up to 5 hours to go through a board pack. So to me, it's all about how to engage management to understand the challenges in more detail. And Rabia, to your earlier question around, what committees do you get involved in? I guess it'll also depend on the trajectory of where the company's going. So if you've got a company that is looking to grow extensively, strategy and investments would probably be a really interesting committee to be part of. If you're looking at a very large organization that's looking to cut costs and restructure maybe operations, might be the right committee if you really want to get engaged and understand how the business works and really get your hands dirty. Maybe operations might be the right committee, and audit and risk might be the right committee. So a lot of the times it depends on where is the organization going, and do you have the time commitment? Because not only do you have committees in our organization, you also have special committees depending on either the opportunity or the risk that you're trying to tackle. And those special committees can be time consuming, sometimes bi-monthly, monthly. And so it all depends on how much time you have to commit to those challenges.
Now, we have a few minutes left, and there's a burning question on the side panel here, India, for you, where someone said it was important for you to get on a board. Why was it so important for you to get on that board? And we'd love to hear that as your closing, perhaps. And then after you finish, we'll go to Michael and Mohammed for their final thoughts. India?
Awesome. Thank you. I'll keep it brief. For me, it was an evolution, right? I knew that I didn't want to do. I'd gotten to the C-suite. I had a global C-suite role. I didn't want a CEO job. That wasn't my aspiration. But I had the C-suite experience, and it was a natural evolution for me to be able to continue to operate in corporate spaces, but not necessarily every day, all day. And so it was something that I'd planned to do post my banking career. It was something that I'd always planned to do. I thought, well, that would be an interesting way of being able to still be engaged, still be able to influence organizational decisions, but not necessarily have to go into the office every day, because I wanted to be able to do other things, other business ventures that I wanted to pursue. So it gave me the opportunity to keep my foot in both of those, and still being able to leverage my experience.
Thank you. I imagine you have a lot of frequent flyer miles collected there, so you can spend your time doing that too, I suppose. Michael, final thoughts as we close our panel?
Okay, my sort of take on this whole issue around boards is that I've been campaigning for a very long time for there to be more Black people on boards in the UK. And I think the message needs to be put out there that this is not an issue that's going to go away. We're not suddenly going to shut up and keep quiet. This is an issue that's becoming more and more international as organizations become more global. You know, there's going to be a demand from Africa being the sort of fastest growing continent commercially on the planet. There's going to be a demand for people who, and I love what Mohammed said earlier, people who actually understand that continent. And eventually, these companies, they'll realize that. They'll realize that. And I just want to see.
So we're making a movement, not a moment, is what you're saying. It's a movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I want to see. I want to see these issues being taken a lot more seriously, because right now the truth is, and I speak obviously primarily from a UK perspective, they're just not being, and they're being sort of dealt with quite sort of patronizing attitude.
In the tokenization.
However,
right? Thank you.
Yeah, and if that continues, however, it's not good for UK for business in UK, and it's as simple as that.
Sure.
So that's what
Thank
I'd
you.
like to see going forward. Yeah.
Let's do that. Mohammed, you've been fantastic. Closing thoughts?
Mine are simple. I think this summit has been fantastic because it frames where the opportunity is. I think diversification in most parts of the world is seen as an issue. And I think the Town Hall Summit 3.0 and going forward shows the opportunity. It's an opportunity, and I think you're going to see that shift towards this is an opportunity. How do we get people like Michael and India and Robbie and myself and more of us to be part of this engaging discussion at the board level for these large multinationals globally? It's happening in Africa for a reason. The reason why it's the most opportunistic continent is because of this mind shift about a half a decade ago. So if the rest of the world will catch up, I think there's more fun to be had.
I totally agree. And so now I'm looking forward to the Town Hall 4.0. India, thank you for having us with you. Michael, been super. Thank you so much. Mohammed, I'm Rabia, and we say thank you for joining us on this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
I luckily, I have the benefit. That was a really great one to sit on. Thank you so much, Rabia, Michael, and Mohammed. This has been a tremendous conversation, and I just enjoy having it. I enjoy being able to provide a platform for people to see and hear the reality, which is something that we don't often hear. So now, excitingly, in just a minute, we're going to come back and we're going to go to our next panel, which is BLM and AAPI, Black Lives Matter, we're gonna, sorry, I'm having a moment here because I'm still thinking about the conversation we just had. We're gonna go to our next panel, which is around BLM and AAPI. How do we have the conversations about those movements at work? What's appropriate? What do we do? How do we move through this? Should we be treating the Asian communities and Black communities the same around the things that are particularly happening in the US? So we're gonna be back in a minute. I hope that you hold tight. Thank you again to our previous panel, and we will see you back. Thanks.